In 1793, revolutionary France was a country close to collapse. Foreign armies pressed in from nearly every direction. Prussian and Austrian forces advanced from the east with the aim of destroying the revolution before it could take root beyond France's borders. Spanish troops crossed the Pyrenees in the south, and Britain prepared to strike at sea. France was not just at war, it was isolated, surrounded, and treated by Europe's monarchies as a contagion that had to be contained and eradicated. The response from the regime that followed did not take the form of a new weapon or battlefield tactic, but it would revolutionize the nature of war. Under the pressure of survival, the revolutionary state redefined what war itself required and who it demanded participation from. What emerged was the levee en masse. Before the revolution, European warfare operated within relatively narrow limits. Armies were professional and expensive, maintained by monarchs through long-standing systems of taxation. Campaigns were seasonal, battles were constrained by logistics and tradition, civilians were rarely mobilized as a matter of policy. War was understood as a contest between states, not between entire societies. Political order and military force remained for the most part separate from everyday civilian life. That all changed with the advent of the French Revolution. The execution of Louis XVI marked a turning point. To Europe's ruling houses, France ceased to be merely unstable, it became an ideological threat. They feared the revolution spilling over to their own middle classes. The conflict was no longer about borders or dynastic claims, it was about whether the old political order itself could survive. Inside France, the crisis was worsening. Inflation accelerated, grain shortages inflamed unrest, and the government lacked trained officers, reliable troops, and sufficient funds. The National Convention was forced to confront the reality that France could not compete with its enemies on their terms. It lacked their wealth, their professional armies, and their institutional stability, though what it had possessed was people. France was at the time Europe's most populous country, so the Republic turned to its population and used it as a weapon. In August of 1793, the Convention issued a decree that placed the entire nation at the service of war. Young unmarried men were conscripted to fight, married men were assigned to transport and production, women were directed towards manufacturing clothing and supplies, children were tasked with preparing bandages, and the elderly were called upon to produce propaganda to stir up the citizenry. The economy was reorganized solely around the survival of the revolution. This mobilization produced armies of unprecedented size, eventually numbering in the hundreds of thousands and then in the millions. Many soldiers were poorly trained, equipment was not standardized, and some troops did not receive the proper ammunition. The government had unleashed a force that it did not fully command. But defeat would have meant the collapse of the revolution, so any price was worth it. However, mass mobilization generated endurance, and much like Rome, it allowed France to absorb losses that would have broken traditional armies. Military service became bound to national identity. Soldiers no longer fought for pay or dynastic loyalty, they fought for the survival of a political project that defined them as citizens. It boosted morale in ways other European armies struggled to match. Victory depended not only on tactics or leadership, but on the capacity to mobilize and sustain the entire population. Production, logistics, and administration moved from the margins of warfare to its center. Civilian labor became as defensive as battlefield maneuver. By the mid-1790s, the system designed to preserve the revolution had begun to do more than defend it. France stabilized, then it rapidly expanded. What had been born from desperation became a source of immense strength. The same mechanisms that allowed France to survive also created the conditions for the rise of Napoleon, a commander who understood how to channel mass armies through centralized administration, logistics, and speed. Napoleon did not invent the levee en masse. Though he inherited the system, he used it to great effect. Other powers took note of France's reforms, and soon conscription spread across Europe and national armies replaced professional forces. The Congress of Vienna restored monarchies and redrew borders, but it did not undo the bloody lessons these nations had learned. Throughout the 19th century, the nation at arms remained intact, even during periods of peace. Industrialization in the latter half of the 19th century expanded on this model of war. Factories, railways, census data, and financial systems became instruments of war planning. The so-called home front was beginning to take its form. When the Great War came in 1914, it did not mark a break with the past. It marked the maturation of a system that had been forming for more than a century. World War I was not the beginning of total war, but its industrial realization. National identity, conscription, economic planning, propaganda, and civilian labor converged into a single structure of mobilization. What had emerged from the panic in 1793 had become a permanent feature of modern governments. Total war did not arrive suddenly. It evolved steadily and deliberately as states learned that survival required turning society itself into an instrument of war. By the time Goebbels was asking the Germans if they wanted total war, the machinery to deliver it was already in place and unleashed a scale of devastation unmatched in history. Thanks for watching. Take care.